Good morning, Bluewater Church family and friends. Welcome to today's service. I'm so pleased that you could join us wherever and whenever you're tuning in from today. Just so glad that you're here. And today is a special day. I feel like every day is a special day, but today's a really special day for three reasons. One is because it's Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day to all of you moms watching. We appreciate you and we love you. And two, it's our first official Sunday with our new Flow intern, Laura Beth, on board. Welcome, Laura Beth. We're going to hear from Laura Beth in just a moment. So put that on the shelf for a moment, but super exciting. And then number three, also exciting, is that we're going to hear a message today from Jon Hand. Jon Hand is our first guest speaker in a series of really excellent speakers who are going to be sharing with Bluewater Church each month, giving us a message directly to us in our specific context. We're so grateful that Jon has invested his time in us this morning. We're going to hear from him today and also next Sunday as well. So before we move on, let's just take a moment to watch this video that is dedicated to all of the ladies watching today on Mother's Day.
Today is Mother's Day, and we want to acknowledge all the women we're blessed to know. We rejoice over you, for your strength, your wisdom, your strong love, and your beautiful faith. Whether today is a celebration for you or a day of quiet reflection and healing, we're thinking of all of you. If you gave birth this year to your first child, our joy overflows and we celebrate with you. If you adopted a child this year or became a foster parent, we rejoice with you and we want to honor you in your commitment to changing the lives of children. If you continue to struggle with infertility, we're hoping with you and holding your hand in prayer. If you are exhausted and feeling underappreciated for all you do for a house full of kids, we applaud you. We love you, and we appreciate you more than you can ever imagine. And if you lost a child this year to death or miscarriage, we weep and mourn with you. And if your child is lost to addiction or to the world, we hurt with you. And we join you in putting our hope in the one who brings prodigals home. If you live with painful memories of your mom, we pray that you will find in a spiritual mother all that you never had from a birth mom. And if you're one of those amazing spiritual moms, we thank you for stepping up and being there when others couldn't. If you're experiencing an empty nest for the first time this year, we walk with you in this new season and are excited about the next chapter God has planned for you. If you're single, we celebrate your strength, beauty, and individuality, and join with you in praying for the desires of your heart. If you're a single mom and wonder if you have the physical energy and financial resources to raise and provide for your child or children, we want to help you, and we will. And if you're pregnant for the first time, we prayerfully anticipate with you the joyful birth of a healthy child. And to all the special women on this Mother's Day, rest and delight in knowing that we are thankful for you, and we celebrate each and every one of you.
So we've been talking for a few weeks now, looking forward to Laura Beth coming on staff with us for the next 4 months over the summer. We've been praying for Laura Beth. Let's continue to pray for her as she settles into this new role. And this is the first service that she's put together for us. Laura Beth is on staff for 10 hours a week. We've hired her to work 10 hours a week, putting together primarily these Sunday morning video services. So really excited to have her passion and her creativity and just the heart that Laura Beth brings. And rather than me talking about her, which I feel like already I've just gotten to know her a little bit, and I feel like I could probably say all kinds of nice things about her for a really long time. But instead of doing that, Laura Beth is going to come on camera right now to introduce herself to you herself. So here's Laura Beth.
Hello, Bluewater. I'm so glad to finally be with you on a Sunday morning. Corrine has asked me to just share a little bit about myself. So I come from my home church, is West Heights Community Church in Kitchener, and we're also a BIC church. Something you might want to know about me is that I love musicals. I just love how song and live performance can capture a story. And what else? I have a really big sweet tooth. I love to bake. I wouldn't say I'm good at baking, but I really enjoy it, at least. And I'm going to be starting at university this fall here in Waterloo for social sciences and social work. I'm really passionate about just building relationship with people at different walks of life, and just bringing the hope and love of Jesus into difficult situations. So that's a little bit about me. I've been tracking with you guys just on YouTube for the last couple months, just to kind of get to know you a little bit. And I've been so struck by just the spirit of humility and incredible generosity and really authenticity. Corrine was just talking about authenticity last week. But it's just so evident in your heart as a church and in the culture of your community. And it's beautiful, just in the way you talk about caring for each other in your moorings or the projects that you're investing in. It's just so clear how you are, as a church, seeking after the things of the kingdom in such real ways. And so I feel so honored to get to be a part of your community this summer and be a part of what God is doing at Bluewater. God bless you guys, and thank you so much for the really warm welcome. And I look forward to being with you in spirit and virtually going forward. Take care.
Thank you, Laura Beth. We're just so grateful that God has brought you to us for this summer. Laura Beth lives in Waterloo, and so she's going to be doing all of this work remotely, which is a really exciting thing that we get to utilize technology in this way this summer to really build relationships and invest in the kingdom work of Jesus in ways that are new and different to us. So thank you so much, Laura Beth, for being part of this new journey for us as well. So Jon Hand is going to share with us this morning on the topic of unity and what it means for Bluewater as a church family to be unified around Jesus as our center. And he's going to unpack a little bit more about what that means. He's also going to introduce himself, but first I'll give another pre-introduction. Jon Hand is on staff, on pastoral staff at the Meeting House Church. He's also on staff with Jesus Collective, which is a new movement, Jesus-centered movement that he's going to share about more as well in just a moment. Jon moved from the States. He is an American friend from the South, and he moved here to work with our denomination, the Be in Christ Church of Canada, a number of years ago. And we're just so grateful that Jon has taken this time to invest in us at Bluewater, to share with us. And I'm not going to talk more because he's going to come on screen just in a few minutes after our opening worship song, and it's going to be great. I do want to just read a call to worship passage before we sing together that is really this topic of unity. And it comes from John's Gospel in chapter 17, verses 20 to 23. This is where Jesus is praying not just for his followers, for his disciples, but for his future followers, the future church as well. And I was thinking also of Mother's Day and how Francis and I don't have kids, but I imagine that if I were a mother with 2 or more children, one of my prayers for them would be that they would live in such a way that they cared for one another and loved each other and together loved the people around them. And so I think that some of that is even reflected in God's heart for us, for the church, that we would live in unity with Christ as our center, to care for one another, respect each other, and draw others into that caring relationship with one another and with Jesus as well. So let me read John 17, starting at verse 20. This is Jesus saying, "I'm not praying only for them, for my disciples, but also for those who will believe in me because of their word. I pray they will be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. I pray that they also will be in us, so that the world will believe that you sent me. I've given them the glory that you gave me, so that they can be one, just as we are one. I'm in them, and you are in me, so that they will be made perfectly one. Then the world will know that you sent me, and that you have loved them just as you have loved me." Let's pray. Jesus, thank you so much for each person watching and listening to this service, for each one who hangs out with us in this Bluewater church, both online and in person. And Lord, we love the way that you work behind the scenes to bring people together. And this morning, we're especially grateful for Laura Beth and for Jon Hand, for the ways that they're investing their hearts and their energy into the things that your Spirit is doing in and through Bluewater. And Lord Jesus, our prayer today is that you would be our core, that you would be our center, the one who unites us, the one whom we rally around to be united in all that we say, all that we do. Lord, may our unity around you bring glory to your name and gladness to your heart. We just praise you and bless your name this morning. Amen. So now I invite you to sing along as we worship with this song.
God be all. Good morning, Bluewater Church. My name is Jon Hand, as Corrine was saying. I'm just thankful to be here with you this morning, and would like to just start with some introductions. So, I'm our family. This is my family. We've been here for 6 years in Ontario. We moved here for me to work with our denomination, the Be in Christ Church of Canada. A couple years later, I started at the Meeting House Church, and I've been in Meeting House for a couple years, and then I started with a network that the Meeting House is helping to start called Jesus Collective. We're a network of like-minded churches like yours and leaders who are really wanting to put Jesus at the center. So this picture is my family taken a couple years ago in Banff. My daughter's 16. My other daughter is on the far right. She's 18. And then my son is 13. This is my beautiful wife, Amy. And we are really enjoying living here in Canada now. So one of the things I get to do in my day jobs is to help Christian leaders learn together how to build churches that have Jesus at the center, that prioritize elevating Jesus above everything else, above Scripture, because Scripture points to Jesus, above tradition, above our even the worship styles and all the things that like churches tend to prioritize. We want to put Jesus back at the center, and I know that that's the desire of your church too. In fact, if you go to your church's website, so grab your phone and go to your church's website, bluewater.church, and go to the About page. And on the About page, there's actually a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. There's even a little illustration there that we're going to be unpacking the more that we talk the rest of our time together. So Corrine was asking me, to kind of take this idea of Jesus-centered and talk about how putting Jesus at the center brings unity to a church, which is a very exciting idea and possibility. So I'm really excited about this because you are in transition. Like you're transitioning from the good leadership that you had with Chris for 5+ years, and now transitioning to Corrine as your lead pastor. And you need to know that I have all kinds of love for Chris. Like I have so much respect for his story, his heart, and just the transformational work that he's allowed Jesus to do in his life. And many of you have found real acceptance, healing, and community at Bluewater as a result of Chris's ministry. And I think it's beautiful. But you're now graduating to a new season. And in new seasons, like we're transitioning to spring, come new opportunities for growth, for Jesus to do new things. And this is my hope for you, that there's something that each of you have that Jesus is wanting to do in your life and in your church in a new way, to do new things. I don't know what those are, but be on the lookout. And times of transition and times of growth like this can be times where these new things flourish, but it can also be times where people get stuck, kind of wanting to hold on to how things were instead of what is and what will be. And the difference is what happens when you are highly influenced, right, by putting Jesus at the center, that you remain unified as a church in this time. This is very important that you stay unified as a church at this time. So let's dive into how Jesus, putting him at the center, creates unity. There's an interesting story in Matthew's biography of Jesus where Jesus is choosing Matthew to be a part of his community. He's forming his community. He's choosing his disciples. And do you guys remember what Matthew's occupation was? Was he a stockbroker? Was he a teacher? No. Was he a computer programmer? No. He was a tax collector, right? So early in Jesus' ministry, Jesus is choosing who he would invite into his inner circle of hundreds of others who were following him. And it's interesting, it's how Jesus invited these people and who Jesus invited to join that I want us to talk about today. And then I want to apply it to you guys at Bluewater. So here we have Jesus talking to choose Matthew, right? So as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting in the tax collector's booth. And he looked at him and said, "Follow me." And he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. So when Jesus was having dinner later that night at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees, who were the religious leaders of the day, when they saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And Jesus, upon hearing this, said, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but those who are ill. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but I've come to call sinners." So I need a few minutes to share something surrounding this that may seem a little abstract, but it actually has a lot of implications for how you understand putting Jesus at the center. And I want to unpack this illustration that's on the website of your church. And so I want to talk first and just say, as we think about unity, there's many different ways to get unity, to find unity, have it. You can have unity that comes around a common enemy. There's somebody who's a threat to us or somebody that we don't like. And so we are going to find connection and relationship and unity because we are positioned against this common threat, common person or group or nation that we don't like. There's also unity that comes because we are the same. We think the same. We like the same things. We enjoy the same pleasures and hobbies. And so it's easy to have unity when everybody thinks the same, looks the same, acts the same, values the same things. And I want to propose that Jesus-centered unity is a very different kind of unity than we find most often. And let's just say from up front, Jesus-centered community looks like this miraculous thing of unity in diversity, because the unity isn't found in unity. It's found in Jesus. So let's go back to the illustration on the website. There's a history to this graphic. And in the 1930s and 40s, there was a guy named Paul Hebert who was born a Mennonite in a Mennonite family, and they grew up in India as a child of American missionaries. And so he watched his parents attempt to introduce people in that culture to Jesus, who were born Hindu and into Hindu religion and culture. So not only did they have Hindu beliefs, they also had the culture and the identity, right? They dressed in a certain way. They celebrated certain religious feasts as a whole family, generations together. And this was a deep part of their identity. And Paul's parents would share Jesus with people, and many in that culture, in that part of India, were fascinated and intrigued by Jesus. But when it came to joining the church, almost nobody had interest in becoming Christians formally and joining a Christian community that was led by these American missionaries at the time. So Paul Hebert, he grew up and he began to question this phenomena, what was happening. And he's a really smart guy, and he goes on to get advanced degrees in anthropology, which I get that, and in math, which I don't get, anthropology and math, what? So Paul Hebert grew up, and he's reflecting on his upbringing. And why is it that these people in this part of India had a fascination with Jesus, but could not come to identify as Christians? So he begins studying about different cultures and identities and how they interact with each other and how identities are formed. And he begins to summarize that missionary movements, like what his parents were a part of, that they were asking something of the Indian people that was more than what Jesus was even asking of them. And as he reflected on this, he began to develop this illustration of what he saw happen in what's called a bounded set. So remember, he's a math weirdo. Sorry for the math people out there. Uh, I am not a math person. There's a reason why I'm not a CPA. There's a reason why I'm a pastor. So Hebert asks, how do you know what something is? How do you define identity? How do you know who you really are, or where you belong, or what group you belong to? And one way he derived one answer at this is he derived it from using a math analogy. And in math, you can have a set of numbers. So consider those people on the graph to be X's, numbers, a number of, say, integers, which I actually have no idea what an integer is, but I've heard it in a math class and it sounds good. So you have an integer, and in that integer, it's a part of a group of other integers that have a clear set of traits that they hold in common, that makes them all belong to a single kind of category. In which case, they are all a bounded set of qualities or characteristics that give them an identity, a formation, like that help bind them together and characterize them. Or they don't share those characteristics, at which point they are not in a bounded set. They're not in that group. So the lines are clear. Either you are in or you are outside of this group. So an example of this would be like a family reunion, right? How do you get invited to a family reunion? Either you're in the family, in the bloodline, or you marry into that family. There you go. And if you aren't one of those two things, you don't belong in the circle. You could be a neighbor, you could be a great person, and still not in that circle because you don't have those characteristics in that bounded set. So Hebert said, as he began to reflect on this growing up, he realized that there's a description of the kind of Christian community. This characterized the community that he grew up in, because many people's perceptions of church community is something like this, right? Many people in Kincardine believe that your church is this place where people are kind of born into it. The parents were like Jesus believers or whatever from an early age. Most everyone agrees to a kind of a clear definition of defining characteristics that define the lines around what makes somebody a Christian or not, a part of that church or not. And in the case of Hebert in India, the people who became Christians began to look a certain way, and they began to sing songs from outside of their culture from North America. And they took on practices and habits and even ways of dressing and devotion to Jesus that over time formed these clear lines that characterized everybody inside that community as looking very similar and being very similar. And so in that way, it became easier to tell who was a Christian in that church and who wasn't. And they were defined by the sameness that they had in common. And then he acknowledges, right? So all throughout history, Hebert starts to notice that the global church in every culture accidentally makes the lines thicker. One of the reasons why the Indian people were open to Jesus, but closed to becoming Christians or identifying with a church was because the church kept adding things to the lines. So you can see, like, they kept adding on things that actually had nothing to do with Jesus, like songs from North America or North American dress or other parts of Western culture that Indian peoples could not identify with. And I see this in my world, like how I grew up. I grew up in the States, and in our version of church, the Christians who belonged inside the lines were those who voted Republican. So they had a belief in Jesus, but they voted Republican. And then over time, we added other things, like they voted Republican. And then they wore like certain kind of clothing that was deemed to be Christian looking or modest. And then they had like the men had certain kind of length of hair and it wasn't too long. And then we had certain Bible versions that we read from, and we didn't drink alcohol. And over time, we began adding all of these other lines, and our unity came from all of these characteristics that were added to the lines. And so if you were open to following Jesus, but you didn't look like us or vote like us or shop like us or believe exactly like us, then you were over here. You were outside the lines. And so there's a lot of this going around these days, not just in the church, but think about like social media. Where does unity come from? It comes from this, people who think like us, protest like us, vote like us, read the same books as us, protest against the protesters like us, who share the same beliefs about race and culture and economics and nationality and nationalism, right? Unity comes from agreement and uniformity. And this is how the world finds unity, in a bounded set. And Hebert called this bounded set thinking. The upside of a bounded set is that it's very clear. You know who's in and you know who's out, right? And if you conform enough to the defining characteristics, then you're in. And the reason that Hebert realized that many people didn't become Christians in India wasn't because they weren't open to Jesus to a degree, but that they couldn't conform to all the additional layers and lines and characteristics that the missionaries inadvertently added to the gospel of Jesus. That didn't mean to keep people away, but it did. And so as Hebert meditated on the stories of Jesus in the gospels, he had another idea that came from math theory. So a centered set is where you have a very clear center. And in this case, you have the person of Jesus. And in a centered set, how do you know your identity? Well, in this case, you know that, how do you know if you're a follower of Jesus? Where are the lines, right? Where's the line that causes me to know that I'm a follower of Jesus? Well, in a centered set that you see on the right there, it's not a static list of characteristics or common behaviors or appearances or rules or things out here that I can kind of check off of that I've done. It's different. It's more like directional. So a centered set illustration is less about being in or out and more about the question of where am I moving and what direction am I going? Where am I moving towards? Am I moving away from the center, or am I moving towards the center, which is Jesus? So push this a little bit further, okay? Let's use music and musicians as an example. If we had a room of 300 people who play instruments, and you ask that group, how many of you are musicians? How many do you think would raise their hand and actually say, I play an instrument, I'm a musician? Well, I'm going to say maybe a third. So 2/3 would say, I'm not a musician. And a third would, right? But if you ask that same group, how many of you are playing instruments, growing your musical gifts? How many of you are playing maybe for other people? How many of you are playing for several hours a week? You might have more people put their hand up, right? And so the question is, what makes somebody a musician? And do they have to play gigs? Do they have to be paid to play gigs? Do they have to travel in a bar band? What makes them a musician? And Hebert would say, what defines them as a musician or not is as simple as two questions. Are they moving towards the center of being a musician, which means they're growing their gifts, they're practicing, they're playing, even if they're not performing in front of people, they're exercising their gifts. If they love the pursuit of playing music and playing the instrument, or they're not. Like they don't practice, they don't pick it up, they don't have a passion for it. Maybe they were in a band in high school, but they don't even know where their instrument is. Where's the guitar? I don't know, right? They'd be moving away from being a musician. And so the community of musicians are those who are pursuing music and musical instrumentation and playing music. They're directionally moving that way. And you can see where this goes. So relate this to how people relate to Jesus, right? Someone can be born into a family of Christians. They can be raised in church. They can have been to Christian camps and vacation Bible schools and all of these things. But their heart posture can be that they think Jesus is lame, right? That they might be born close to where Jesus is, but they're actually moving away from Jesus. Maybe they're moving towards building their career or making money or finding love. And that's what they're doing with intention and commitment. That's where they're finding their identity, right? Pursuing those things more than pursuing Jesus with intention and commitment. And so their arrows are pointing away from Jesus. And you can see, in the figure, you can see you have somebody who's like really close in, but their arrow is pointing away. And you have somebody who's really far away, and their arrow is pointing in towards Jesus. And so this is where it gets fun. You can have somebody who's like the opposite, like that person in the uphand corner, where they're very far away, kind of like Matthew. So back to Matthew chapter 9, here's an example of somebody who starts far away from Jesus, right? Yet they start coming alive when they meet Jesus. So Matthew's raised as a young Jewish person, and he's in a bounded set community. We study Torah, we go to synagogue, like we seek the solidarity of the community. We have a respectable trade. So all of these things define Matthew and his community. And he knows if he's inside that, right? Because unity equals uniformity. But as Matthew gets older, something changes. Something changes, and he leaves his community. Remember his job? What's his job? He's a tax collector. So he's collecting taxes, right? From who? The Jewish people. And who is he collecting taxes for? The Romans. In fact, these coins are from ancient Jewish or ancient Judea. There we go. And these are Roman coins that are celebrating the way that the Romans have dominated the Jewish people in that area. You can see the Roman soldier has his boot over. It's a Jewish soldier on the coin. And so the Jewish soldiers were rebelling against Rome, and Rome was squashing that rebellion. And Matthew works for the enemy. He's a traitor. And he works for an oppressive tax system that is keeping his people in poverty so that Rome can build infrastructure and roads to expand its empire. And on top of that, the tax collectors of the day were known to skim off the top and exploit their people financially for their own gain, like Zacchaeus in the biblical story. So Matthew's exploiting his own people. He's working for the big bosses, the enemy of Rome. He's hated. He represents everything that's wrong. And so where would Matthew be in this picture? He would be out here, right? Or would Matthew actually be over here? So if you go back to Matthew chapter 9, Matthew's sitting in a tax collection booth, and Jesus comes to him and says, "Follow me." And he does. He actually gets up. He makes eye contact with Jesus. Something stirs in his heart, and he follows Jesus in this, like, that was easy, this mysterious way. And something stirred in him as he locked eyes with Jesus, and he makes this personal connection. There was a longing that Jesus evoked in him, and the arrow of his life started turning away from money, exploitation, the Roman enemy, and towards Jesus, right? So when Matthew begins to walk away from security and power and greed and moves towards Jesus, it says that the characteristics of Jesus began to define him, that he started moving in the direction of mercy and humility and seeing his need for mercy. So when does Matthew become a Christian? When does he become in? We don't know. If he's in a bounded set, it's simple. He prays a prayer. He starts attending synagogue. But if it's a centered set, we don't know when he becomes a Christian. We just know that he's moving towards Jesus. And it's messy, right? Who's in, who's out? But in a Jesus-centered community, how is unity formed? It's formed by everybody pointing their arrows towards Jesus. It's not formed by conforming in sameness to a list of rules or regulations or practices that everybody agrees will make them the same. So how does putting Jesus at the center affect unity? So think about, I'm a pastor, I'm not a CPA, and I'm not an astrophysicist, okay? So let's just clear the air on that. But I want to say, I think I know enough of what happens in the physics of the solar system to use this example. So you have a solar system, you have the planets in the orbit around the sun. If you increase the size of the sun in the middle, what does it do to the planets? It actually increases the force of gravity on the planets, and it pulls the planets towards the sun. This is interesting. So let's say I am Mars and you are Mercury, right? So I'm here and you're here, and we are on the opposite side of an issue. So maybe it's we think differently about politics or COVID. COVID's been very divisive. I have an idea about protocols and you have an idea, and I think the church should meet and you think the church shouldn't meet. And we are on two different sides of this issue. And the question is not, how do I convince you of how wrong you are so that you can be right like me? Because, yeah, how often does that work? And the question isn't, how do I figure out a way for us to agree to disagree? Because you can agree to disagree and not have unity. This is a process of leading us towards unity. The question is, how can I make Jesus bigger? Because if I'm making Jesus bigger and you're making Jesus bigger, Mars and Mercury are moving closer to each other as we make Jesus bigger. As the sun increases in the size, they are moving closer towards each other. And this is what Jesus does for you and me when we disagree, when we're not the same, when we don't have things in common, when we don't look at the world in the same way. But if we increase the size of Jesus, we are actually moving closer together relationally, in our attitude, in our love for each other. And this is what happens when Jesus is Lord, when we increase the size of Jesus. So Jesus forms unity in a radically different, audacious way. So jump with me over to Matthew chapter 10. And here Matthew, the tax collector, in fact, is writing a list of people that Jesus is handpicking to be a part of his inner circle. Let's look at two of these people that he has handpicked. Actually, there's three, but we don't have time for Judas. So in this, you have Matthew. Is he good guy or bad guy? Bad guy, right? And you have Simon the Zealot. Now, did you know that the Zealots were people who would pick up swords and they would go kill people who were Jewish people working for Rome, like Matthew, or Romans? So you have Matthew, the Jewish person working for Rome, the enemy, and you have Simon the Zealot, whose group that he's a part of, the Zealots, are the ones who pick up swords and go kill people like Matthew. And Jesus goes and handpicks these guys talk about like overcoming diversity or disagreement. And so Matthew and Simon are both drawing closer to each other because they're putting Jesus at the center of their life. Their arrows are pointed towards him, and Jesus, as he increases, right, their allegiance to him, their love for him, his love for them, they receive it. It's drawing them closer to Jesus and each other. It's brilliant. So, can you think of examples of this kind of unity, maybe not as extreme, at work in your church? Like, where do you see unity, not from uniformity, but unity that comes from having the arrows pointing at Jesus, from making him bigger at the center, from where you're starting from? Like, there's so much here. I hope you're able to talk about this in your moorings group this week. But there's three ways that we can just put a cherry on top here for this conversation. So if you are going to be a unified, Jesus-centered community, you have to expect that your church is going to be messy and it's going to challenge your comfort. But this celebration of difference in unity, not in conformity and sameness, but unity in diversity around Jesus. This is a picture to Kincardine or wherever you live that Jesus is Lord. Because unity in Canada does not happen because we're so different necessarily. Even if we are different, it's because we are people who value difference, but you don't get unity from people who don't value difference and people who do value difference. And here we find Jesus taking opposites and creating unity out of them. But it's messy and you can't control it. There's not always clear lines of like who's in and who's out, when and where. But it's not always about, it's about what's happening like in here, like what Jesus is doing in me to change my posture and be in my attitude towards those who are not like me. What's the characteristic that Jesus said of those who are following him? That they are seeking mercy. That's what he said. Jesus said, I'm seeking mercy and grace. So be on the lookout also for bounded set thinking in your heart. The human heart is always looking for a little perch to sit ourselves higher up on so that we can feel a little bit more superior, a little bit better about ourselves. Maybe it's because like I don't smell like that person, or I don't dress like that person, or I don't believe like that person, or I don't do the things that they do that I think are questionable, or there's always a little perch. It's like we're carrying around hula hoops, like little bounded set circles. Remember those hula hoops you'd stand inside? So I invite you to examine, do you have bounded set lines of who's in and who's out in your heart around certain behaviors, attitudes, beliefs that you don't share with other people, even in your church? And I invite you to explore those with Jesus, inviting him to show you where the arrows of your heart might be forming lines of judgment that have actually nothing to do with Jesus and everything to do with feeling superior. And that's a scary question to ask yourself, but I invite you to do it. And then lastly, Jesus wants to form a community out of Bluewater that is so unified that the rest of Kincardine, especially those who don't believe in Jesus, look at your community and say, I wonder if Jesus is real, because of the kind of love that you have for each other, and the love that you have for those who are not like you, the way that you serve those that you disagree with, the way that you are quick to forgive, the way that you embrace those who are not like you. I believe whenever Jesus is involved, your best days as a church are always ahead of you. They're always ahead of us. And I want to invite you to practice Jesus-centered unity. So right now, before you go about the rest of your day, take your cell phone or take out a pen and paper and write a note to somebody in your sphere of influence, in your community, who's different from you, who might annoy you at times, that you might disagree with. Maybe you've had conflict with them in the past. And I invite you to write them a note and say, thank you for being you. Thank you for being different from me. Thank you for challenging me. Thank you for showing me new ways of thinking and different ways of thinking. And practice Jesus-centered unity. You're doing this because you're making Jesus a greater priority than the things that you have in difference with each other. Bless you, Bluewater. Bless your work ahead of you. Bless this new season with Pastor Kareen. Bless you. And may you find your unity in Jesus as you move forward. Peace.
Thank you so much, Jon, for sharing that message with us today. We, again, just appreciate your perspective on this and appreciate your time and your investment. And thanks to each of you for watching to the end of this service. And I hope that today has been an encouragement to you, a blessing to you, that it's maybe sparked some new ways of thinking or affirmed paths of thinking that you are already walking down. And if you have any questions or comments about anything that you've heard today, we've set up a new email address. It's ask@bluewaterchurch.ca. Before you say anything about the address, bluewaterchurch.ca, Kareen, that's not the address of our website. It's bluewater.church. I know, that wasn't a mistake. In fact, I'll share more about that next Sunday. But in the meantime, ask@bluewaterchurch.ca. You can send any of your questions about the service content there, or really if there's something that's been on your mind, on your heart for the last number of days or weeks that you're really wondering about, asking about, wanting to know more about, go ahead and send those, if you don't mind, to that email address. You might not get a really long response. It might not be the platform where there is that discussion, but it's possible that in a service down the line, that very question might come up in a conversation in one of these Sunday morning online services. So please feel free. In fact, I'm asking you any questions that you may have this Sunday or in future Sundays. This is just something that we want to try and do to incorporate more voices, questions, get an idea of the things that you're asking right now in this season of your life. And of course, weekly moorings, the mooring groups are a place where that's a great time to process some of these questions, but we want to open that up and bring that to our Sunday morning times together as well. So again, that's ask@bluewaterchurch.ca. So we're going to leave it here for this week. Next week, we're going to pick up with a conversation that I got to have with Jon Hand as a follow-up to today's message. And so really excited to share at least part of that conversation with you because it ended up being really long. So we'll cut it down to a reasonable length of time and really look forward to spending another hour with you next Sunday morning here online. So until then, go in peace to love and serve the Lord, and just pray that the Holy Spirit would just highlight something that will sink into your mind and your heart this week around this theme and this vision for a church family who really is serious about following Jesus, being our allegiance being to Jesus and having him be at the center of who we are in what we do. So we're going to close now with another worship song, and I invite you again to sing along with us.
One